What would you do if God asked you to sacrifice your child? Not metaphorically, not in theory, not symbolically in the form of time, money, or comfort, but literally. Your child, your blood, your future, your joy, placed on an altar by your own hands. It's one of the most haunting and unimaginable questions in all of human history. And one man didn't just ask it, he lived it. This isn't a fable. It's not a parable with soft edges and easy answers. This is a raw, soul-wrenching moment recorded in sacred texts, revered by billions across centuries and continents. It's a story that appears in the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran because it cuts to the very heart of what it means to trust, to obey, and to believe. That man was Abraham, a man promised the impossible, a child in his old age, a future as vast as the night sky. Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. So shall your offspring be. Genesis 15:5. And then, when the promise was finally fulfilled, when hope had become flesh, when the impossible had become a laughing, running little boy, God spoke again, and this time the command was unbearable. Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. Genesis 22:2. Can you feel the silence that must have followed those words? The sheer weight of them? This is not just about Abraham. This is about every parent who has ever held a child and imagined a future. Every believer who has ever faced a divine command they didn't understand. Every heart that has wrestled with the question, can I still trust God when nothing makes sense? Why would a loving, all-powerful God demand something so painful, so seemingly cruel? Was it merely a test, or was it a revelation? Was it a story of surrender, or a shadow of something deeper to come? You see, this isn't a tale of violence. It's not a call to bloodshed or blind fanaticism. It's a mirror reflecting the deepest kind of surrender, the kind of obedience that breaks a person open, the kind of faith that doesn't walk with confidence but with trembling steps and still moves forward. This is a story about hearing the impossible and responding with trust, about holding nothing back, not even what you love most. And in the next few moments, you won't just revisit this ancient narrative. You'll step inside it. You'll feel the tension, the heartbreak, the silence between father and son. You'll wrestle with the same questions Abraham faced. And by the end, you may just discover that true sacrifice isn't about what you lose, but about what you're willing to give in faith, love, and obedience.
The command. The test didn't begin with a thunderous roar or a dramatic display of divine power. It didn't come with fire or wind or visions that shook the earth. It began with a whisper. The stillness of the morning was interrupted by a call, a voice that cut through the silence, sharp and clear. Abraham. And without hesitation, Abraham answered, "Here I am." Not what now, not why me, just here I am. It was an answer of readiness, an open invitation to whatever the next moment would hold. But then came the command, the words that would break his heart and reshape history forever. Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and offer him as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. Genesis 22:2. A command so precise, so personal, so devastating. It was as if God had reached into Abraham's soul and torn the very thing he cherished most from him. Isaac wasn't just his son. He wasn't merely a child. Isaac was the fulfillment of a promise, the miracle born when Abraham and Sarah had long since given up hope. Isaac represented God's covenant. He was the future, the answer to Abraham's prayers, the promise of generations to come. But now, that future was in jeopardy. The hope that had been born out of faith and years of waiting was now the very thing God was asking Abraham to give up. And there it was, the contradiction. A contradiction that would make any parent tremble, any believer question. How could the God of promises, the God of faithfulness, ask Abraham to sacrifice the very promise he had given him? How could the God of life call for death? Why would the Creator of all things demand the life of this innocent child? It wasn't just about obedience. It was a test of trust. Not just trust in the idea of God or the history of God's promises, but a trust so deep and radical that could withstand the full weight of personal loss. A trust that transcended logic, that defied comfort, that soared beyond comprehension. Abraham had no arguments, no delays. There were no protests, no pleas for mercy, no demands for an explanation. Instead, he did what most of us would find impossible. The very next morning, without a moment of hesitation or doubt, he saddled his donkey, gathered the wood, and set out for the mountain God had shown him. This wasn't just a journey across the land. This was a journey across Abraham's soul. Every step was a step deeper into the unknown, a step closer to the sacrifice of his son. Each step was a silent scream, an unspoken prayer. But Abraham did not falter. The hope that Isaac represented, the hope of his lineage, his future, his entire life's work, was now something Abraham had to surrender, to trust that if God could bring life from death once, he could do so again. But how? The journey was agonizing. Abraham had to carry the weight of the sacrifice on his back, even as his heart broke with every step. And yet the very act of obeying was itself an act of faith, the kind of faith that refuses to turn back, no matter how steep the climb, no matter how dark the horizon. He could have stayed. He could have argued. He could have walked away from the mountain altogether and justified his decision. But no, this was the journey of a man determined to fulfill what God had commanded, no matter the cost. This would either be the end of Abraham's legacy, or it would fulfill it in the most mysterious, miraculous way. What began as a whisper from God would soon resound as the deepest test of faith, trust, and obedience any human being could ever face.
The journey. Imagine the silence. For 3 days, Abraham and Isaac walked together. 3 days of nothing but the sound of footsteps on dust, the steady rhythm of hooves against the earth, and the quiet hum of thoughts that could not be spoken. 3 days. 3 days of agony, every step an unspoken prayer, every mile an unrelenting weight on Abraham's heart. 3 days of looking at his son, his beloved son, and knowing what awaited at the end of that journey. In the beginning, there was a sliver of hope, a chance for doubt to slip in. 3 days. 3 days to change his mind. 3 days to call off the sacrifice. 3 days to turn back, to question the voice that had once promised him everything, only to now demand everything in return. And yet, through it all, Abraham kept walking. 3 days. And in those days, Abraham didn't waver. He didn't scream or protest. He didn't fall to his knees begging for a different answer. Instead, he moved forward with a quiet, unbroken resolve, knowing the cost, but trusting the promise. He had no idea what God was doing, no understanding of the greater plan that would unfold, but still, he walked. On the third day, Abraham looked up, his eyes scanning the horizon, and in the distance he saw the mountain, the place where the sacrifice would take place, the place where his obedience would be tested, and where his love would be stretched to the breaking point. Genesis 22, verse 4 tells us, "On the third day Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance." This was it, the end of the journey, the point of no return, the place where his faith, his love, and his obedience would either be fulfilled or shattered. But even at the foot of that mountain, Abraham still did not hesitate. He had 2 servants with him and Isaac, and when they reached the foot of Mount Moriah, he turned to the servants and said, "Stay here with the donkey. We will go over there and worship, and then we will come back to you." Notice that last part, "We will come back to you." Did Abraham truly believe that God would intervene at the last moment, sparing Isaac from the sacrifice? Did he believe that something miraculous would happen on that mountain, that somehow God's mercy would break through? Or was it faith that spoke, hiding the agony and the uncertainty that must have torn at his chest? "We will come back to you." Those words were an act of courage, perhaps even more than the journey itself. They were a declaration of trust, a trust so deep that Abraham didn't allow the reality of the sacrifice to paralyze his faith. He would go through with it, but he would speak in hope, even as his heart wept. And then came the final climb. The mountain loomed before them, rising like a silent giant against the sky, and the journey was nearly over. Abraham took the fire in one hand, Isaac took the wood in the other. In that moment, as father and son ascended together, the weight of the world seemed to settle on Abraham's shoulders. This wasn't just a physical climb, it was the climb of the soul. Every step was a reminder of the love he had for Isaac, and every step felt heavier than the last. It was as if the mountain itself was testing him. Would he carry through? Would he surrender? And then Isaac spoke. "Father, where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham's heart broke in that single moment. How could he explain the truth to Isaac, the son who trusted him so completely, the son who had never known anything but love and protection? What could he say to him, this child who had never known anything but love and protection? Abraham's voice, though shaking with emotion, remained steady. "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." In that moment, Abraham didn't lie. He spoke in faith, faith that somehow, some way, God would provide. But deep inside, he knew the truth. Isaac was the offering. The answer to Isaac's question, the burning question that must have pierced through Abraham's soul, wasn't the one Abraham had hoped for. Isaac was the lamb, and Abraham would be the one to carry out the sacrifice. As they continued climbing, the weight of the truth grew heavier on Abraham's heart. This wasn't just a physical sacrifice, it was the very heart of what it meant to obey God when everything inside you screamed to turn away. Every step forward now was not just a step toward a mountain, but toward the ultimate act of surrender. A surrender that demanded everything Abraham had. There was no turning back. The mountain was before them, the altar was near, and Isaac, his beloved son, would be the one to lie upon it. The sacrifice moment. The altar was built, the wood was arranged, and Isaac was laid upon it. Imagine that moment. The wood was stacked high, the fire prepared, and the air grew thick with the anticipation of what would come next. And then Isaac, his beloved son, his miracle, the answer to years of prayer and yearning. Isaac was placed on the altar. The boy who had walked with him up the mountain, the boy who had carried the wood, who had trusted his father when he spoke of God's provision. Now Abraham stood before him, trembling, his hands shaking, as he began the unthinkable. He bound his son. He tied his son's hands, wrists, and ankles, and laid him gently on top of the very wood that would soon consume him. Genesis 22:9 paints this moment with haunting simplicity. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Let that sink in. Abraham, the father, who had cradled this boy in his arms, who had seen his son grow from a baby to a young man, was now preparing to be the one who would end his life. His hands shook, not just from the physical labor of binding Isaac, but from the emotional weight that threatened to break him in two. Every rope, every knot felt like a knife cutting into Abraham's heart. How could he do this? How could he carry out the command of God that felt so wrong? Every fiber of his being screamed in agony, but still he continued. He had come this far, and Isaac, the child who had no idea what was happening, still trusted his father. Imagine Isaac's face. What did he feel in that moment? Had he begun to understand? Did he sense the weight of what was happening? Or was he still too young to see the truth in his father's eyes, trusting in him with the blind faith only a child can possess? Isaac's trust in his father mirrored Abraham's trust in God. It was complete, it was unquestioning, and it was painful beyond words. And then, the knife. Abraham reached for the knife. This was the moment. This was the point where faith met fear, where obedience demanded sacrifice, not of things, not of possessions, but of the most precious, beloved person in Abraham's life. The weight of the knife in Abraham's hand was not just physical. It was the weight of every promise he had ever been given, every moment of faith he had ever lived. It was the weight of everything he had hoped for, and now the weight of losing it all. In that single breath, the heavens themselves seemed to hold their breath. Everything hung in the balance. Everything was about to come to an end, or perhaps everything would be transformed in a way Abraham could never imagine. The blade was raised. The moment of truth had come. A life was mere moments from ending. A father stood ready to sacrifice everything. And then, a voice. From above, a voice thundered through the stillness of the moment, shattering the tension like a bolt of lightning. Abraham, Abraham. In that instant, time seemed to stop. The blade halted mid-air, suspended by something greater than fear, greater than reason, and Abraham froze. He had heard the voice, and the voice was clear, clearer than any other voice he had ever heard before. The angel of the Lord continued, "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." The test was over. The blade fell silent.
The heavens exhaled, and for a moment the world seemed to stop turning, as if the weight of the moment had caused the entire universe to pause in awe. Abraham's heart, which had been broken and shattered, began to beat again, slowly at first, but with renewed life. The sacrifice was not completed, not in the way Abraham had feared, but it was complete in a far more profound way than he could ever have understood. This was the moment that defined Abraham, not as the man who would have sacrificed his son, but as the man who had trusted God with the impossible, the man who had surrendered everything, even his own beloved Isaac. And then, as if to seal the moment, the angel spoke again, giving Abraham a glimpse of God's provision and mercy. "Do not lay a hand on the boy." And God had provided not just a ram, but a deeper understanding of who he was. God had provided the test and the answer in one act of obedience. In that quiet moment, with Isaac still lying there, Abraham's faith was affirmed, not in the sacrifice of his son, but in the trust he had shown in God, the trust that had carried him all the way up the mountain.
Divine intervention. The silence was broken, just as the knife hovered over Isaac's throat, ready to end the life of the son Abraham had waited for, longed for, and loved beyond measure. The stillness was shattered by a voice from heaven, a voice that did not merely call out, it thundered. A voice that cut through the moment like lightning, breaking the tension and the terror in one decisive breath. The angel of the Lord called out, "Abraham, Abraham," Genesis 22:11. The voice was familiar. Abraham had heard it before, but this time it wasn't a command. This time it was a call to stop. Abraham's response was immediate, the same response he had given at the beginning of this journey, when the first command came from God all those days ago. He answered, breathless, his voice trembling but steady. "Here I am," Genesis 22:11. But this time, Abraham wasn't answering a call to action. This time, he was answering mercy. For 3 days, Abraham had walked, step by agonizing step, towards this moment. For 3 days, he had surrendered his will. For 3 days, his faith had been stretched to the point of breaking. And now, in this final brutal instant, God's mercy flooded in. The angel's words echoed through the stillness, a command to stay Abraham's hand. "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Genesis 22:12. This moment revealed a profound truth. God didn't want Isaac. He never truly wanted Isaac's life. What he wanted, what he had been after all along, was Abraham's heart. God was not testing Abraham's capacity for violence, nor his desire to see bloodshed. He was testing Abraham's willingness to surrender his deepest affection, his greatest hope, and his most cherished promise to God. God wanted Abraham to give the one thing that had once seemed impossible to give, to lay down his most beloved possession, his own son, as an act of ultimate submission and trust in God. And Abraham did. He obeyed, even when it tore his heart apart. And just as the knife began to fall, just as the breaking point seemed to arrive, God provided. Abraham looked up, and in the distance, caught in the thicket by its horns, was a ram. Genesis 22:13 paints the divine moment with stunning simplicity. Abraham went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. Genesis 22:13. The ram had been there all along, waiting for this moment, caught in the thicket, hidden from sight until God's perfect timing. And here was the heart of the test. When all seemed lost, when the sacrifice of Isaac appeared inevitable, God provided. God made a way. God intervened. This wasn't just a physical sacrifice, it was a spiritual one, a revelation of the very nature of God, a reminder that when everything else feels impossible, God will always make a way. He will provide. Abraham, moved by the depth of God's mercy and provision, gave the place a name that would echo through the ages: the Lord will provide. In that moment, Abraham saw not just a ram in the thicket, but the undeniable truth that God is always with us, even in our darkest moments, even when we can't see the way forward. When hope seems gone, God is there, making a way when we cannot. This divine intervention, this last-minute rescue, became more than just a personal experience for Abraham. It became a model of ultimate submission, of absolute trust in God's provision. And this story, this moment of divine grace, would be remembered forever, not just by the Israelites, but also by Muslims during the annual festival of Eid al-Adha. It is a moment that echoes through history, symbolizing the very heart of faith, obedience, trust, and divine provision. The test was never about death. It was always about trust. And Abraham passed.
Abraham's legacy, the price of real faith. Abraham was never meant to lose his son. That was never the point of the test. Isaac was always meant to live. He was the miracle child. He was the promise, the future, the symbol of God's faithfulness. But what Abraham was meant to lose was the illusion that he could hold anything back from God, his deepest hopes, his dearest love, his most cherished dream. You see, this story isn't about sacrifice for the sake of sacrifice. It's not about blind obedience or unquestioning submission. It's about trust. True faith is about surrendering what's most precious to you, knowing that God can be trusted with it, that God, in His wisdom and love, is the ultimate provider, and that even when you can't see the way forward, He is working all things together for your good. Abraham's faith wasn't proven in the moments when things were easy. It wasn't proven when the promises were being fulfilled and the blessings were flowing freely. No, Abraham's faith was proven in the wilderness, in the moments of uncertainty, when he stood on that mountain, knife in hand, staring down the terrifying reality that God had asked him to give up the very thing he loved most. Faith isn't proven when everything makes sense. It's proven when you walk up that mountain, step after agonizing step, not knowing what God will do, but trusting that He will provide. Faith is not a formula. It's not a guarantee of comfort. Faith is the courage to trust in God's goodness, even when we don't understand His plan. Abraham didn't just pass a test. He stepped into something far greater, a legacy of trust, obedience, and radical surrender. A legacy that would echo through the generations, shaping the faith of countless believers across time and space. And in that moment, on the mountain, the world was changed. Because Abraham's willingness to surrender gave birth to a new understanding of what it means to follow God with everything. So ask yourself, what are you still holding back? What's the one thing you haven't fully surrendered to God? Maybe it's your career, your dreams, your relationships, or the things you think you can't live without. What would it look like to trust God with those things, even when it doesn't make sense? Faith isn't about being comfortable. It's about being willing to let go, knowing that when you do, God will provide. And even when the path forward is unclear, He will lead you, guide you, and take you to a place where His promises are bigger than your fears. If this story moved you, if it challenged you, or if it made you see faith in a new light, don't scroll past. This message isn't just for Abraham. It's for you. It's for me. It's for all of us living in a world where trust and surrender are the keys to unlocking the promises of God. So take a moment, tap like, hit subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to remember that real faith costs something. But in the end, it gives everything. Because in God's hands, everything we give up becomes something greater.